You're listening to the Peter Ryan Report on CoinSpice.io. You're listening to the Peter Ryan Report on CoinSpice.io.
You're listening to the Peter Ryan Report on CoinSpice.io.
We're back with the Peter Ryan Report on CoinSpice, episode 6. And this time around, we're facing Peter's take on the ecosystem. So I think for a lot of people, myself included, we began at least by seeing Bitcoin as one thing, maybe this magical internet bean, and we can send it between, give it to each other through email or something like that. It has since blossomed into something I don't think anybody saw coming, right?
Yeah, it was this little project in the corner of the internet that no one really noticed at first, and seen as something almost akin to someone playing Magic the Gathering or cards like that. And
exactly.
Little did they know how similar that would go on to be. But yeah, it really emerged later into this grand phenomenon that we see it today. And at the early days, probably no one really thought all of the ramifications and players and dynamics that would transpire.
And before we get into where I think we might go, let's give a lay of the land. So you have cryptocurrencies, and then you have miners, and then you kind of give us a brief overview of basically what the ecosystem consists of 10 years on.
Yeah, so we obviously have Bitcoin, but then that's grown out into forks of Bitcoin. That's grown into different blockchains altogether, alternative cryptocurrencies, private versus public blockchains when it comes to enterprise companies getting into the matter. And also trying to pervert the name to distributed ledger technology and the likes of that. So we have these different categories of cryptocurrencies, blockchains that have come about. And then when we expand into the players, what we see is, number one, the developers. And that's who we first really think about: who has control of these cryptocurrencies, who is inventing them, who is managing them. And then we think of the users next. And these are the people that are getting their hands on it. They're paying for goods and services. They're hodling. They're using them for decentralized applications. And so really, when most people just think, how do cryptocurrencies operate and who's causing all this activity? It's the developers on the back end, it's the users on the front end. But then we can go steps further and we can really look at some other people that are around. And so miners are an often overlooked category of people that are very important, specifically to proof of work blockchains, in that they're pushing transactions through, they're validating the chain, and they're basically engaging in one of the key ways that Satoshi Nakamoto came up with to incentivize people to be honest. And so if you have sort of this proof of work, this capitalist-like game going on, where it's always more profitable to all the competing miners out there to follow the rules rather than to 51% attack the chain or double spend or do any sort of perverse attack on the network, all those competing miners really play that important role of sustaining the health going forward. But
just on the mining idea itself, that branches out even further underneath the mining rubric to hardware manufacturers, as you mentioned, the different types of algos, mining pools, cloud stuff. I mean, it's crazy. Just you could spend a whole episode and beyond just discussing mining, right?
Exactly. So there's like a micro ecosystem within the miners where you laid it out perfectly. There's not just what probably was envisioned back in the early days of just there's this miner, there's this guy that's or this larger group devoting um, you know infrastructure cost and compute electricity, computing power, all within sort of the first party. But then you get out into second and third parties when you talk about there's mining pools. People are kind of linking up and diversifying the probabilities to attain a block and distribute the rewards, as well as the manufacturers who are, they're selling the shovels to the gold diggers, and they're coming up with new algorithms to be faster and better. And, whoever has that new hardware that's the greatest is sort of the greatest miner. And so like they're downstream or upstream from affecting the network in a way. And then, you talk about, cloud mining and sort of how different parties, it's like they don't even have to think about the dynamics of the hardware, the electricity costs. They can just completely pay someone else to do it for them and reap the rewards.
And we haven't even gotten into like chip development. The whole mining boom and manufacturer boom caused further chip scarcity and run out for gaming consoles. And I mean, there's a R&D on the mining manufacturing side, at least for a while, that was even leaning towards AI. And I mean, it's just amazing, right?
Yeah, it's really this twist on the Milton Friedman pencil story where, you start with one individual pencil and you try to unravel all the materials and all of the people that went in to produce this one pencil. And you end up, going back to the rubber and the eraser, the metal and the little bit connecting it, the wood that came from the timber, and so forth. And you get down to like, okay, so the wood came from some forest area somewhere. Well, there was lumberjacks, and then those lumberjacks also need to be fed breakfast. So then there's the diners and the chefs, and then those chefs need cars, so there's the car dealership. And so we're kind of doing this with cryptocurrency a little bit, and we can see how far this goes on. But really, to tighten it back up, it's this multifaceted ecosystem where it's not just the computer hacker developer guy that's creating these things or the user that's going out using them, but it's these other unique players like miners, like the manufacturers of mining equipment that are coming in and playing a very significant role, and how we should think about that, and how especially new people should think about how that affects their investment or their decision to use a particular cryptocurrency. For instance, if you don't really understand mining dynamics and you're coming in new and you're trying to choose between a proof of work or a proof of stake currency, you could be at a loss of really fully understanding what you're getting yourself into and the underlying utility of each. And just to specify on proof of stake quick, now we branched off into stakers. This is a new class of player in the ecosystem where instead of devoting computer power and the entrepreneurial spirit to being the most competitive miner in a proof of work chain, now we have these proof of stake chains where it's really who has the most capital. And whoever has the most capital within a chain that can devote to say, I'm going to stake this, I'm going to put this up as collateral. And so whoever has the most staked can actually get more blocks given to them to validate them, to push transactions through. And the way that works out in terms of the scenario that those that invented envisioned would be that, oh, well, if they try to attack the system, well, they will lose the collateral that they put out because the wider network will decide, they were nefarious and, thus they lost the money. So that's a whole new dynamic.
Yeah, it's the more you try to break the ecosystem down, the more you realize how complicated, how complex it has become. And so far, we've only touched on coins, devs, and miners. We haven't even gotten into the 800-pound gorilla that's haunting this particular episode, which of course is
exchanges. And I think it's really, fair to say in the beginning, no one really saw that exchanges would play such an outsized role in influencing the industry, of creating the culture, of deciding matters in terms of, specifically, like, let's bring up, who is the true Bitcoin, and it's almost a function of, well, who do the exchanges reward the ticker symbol to? That is such of a value that is placed, that there's really no contest to say that, oh, well, exchanges don't matter. And in fact, if back when Bitcoin Cash forked, all the exchanges gave it BTC as the ticker, there'd be maybe a whole different conversation over, what is the original chain, or, what these
That's
arguments
a great point.
And there's even exchanges that don't even provide the requested ticker, which is BCH, and they try to, throw out BAB or BCH, ABC, whatever, trying to maybe, confuse or, distinguish it and such. And so, again, they're playing a role in deciding matters of, what is, what is valuable, and by them placing emphasis on a ticker, by them listing a coin in the first place, getting aside of just sort of that nomenclature issue, just the listing and delisting becomes a huge action that these exchanges can take to affect the future of coins. And we saw this most recently with the delisting of BSV when Craig Wright was going around with the legal action, and a lot of people got bent out of shape over that. And so notably Kraken, Shapeshift, and Binance all decided at once that we're going to delist BSV because Craig Wright is such of a tangled up in that coin. And so all at once you just saw these exchanges basically just lay a knockout punch, in a sense, to the BSV community and the value of that coin. Whereas, let's remove them from the picture. Should exchanges have such of a say like that? Is that good? And, should we be judging these coins purely on the merit of their developers and their network, specifics, and then ultimately the market decides? Ultimately, delisting is up to the buyers and sellers, and the ultimate delisted event is when the coin goes to zero. So
right, and
even go on.
Go ahead. So the tension there is the one that you mentioned, but also from our camp, we tend to play both sides of that argument, in the sense that on the one hand, we'll cry shitcoin, 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 and then on the other, to say an exchange like Binance, and we'll label CZ as being, the quintessential S-coin peddler, and that he's just out to, flood the market with nonsense and balls. And on the other hand, we'll say, oh, well, you should keep all coins on until the market decides. So there seems to be a weird cognitive dissonance that our side is running through as well, in the sense that if we have, say, a bias against exchanges, or we have a bias against exchanges listing, everybody and their mom. I think also an interesting aspect of which I'm sure you're going to get to is the liquidity idea, and that trading is happening on these exchanges away from peers. So in other words, if Bitcoin is an electronic peer-to-peer cash system, as the white paper's title is, exchanges seem to not violate it, but they're doing something dramatically different. And I don't want to turn this into anti-exchange or whatever. I'm pro speculation, as all libertarians are, but it is a different evolution or a different idea from where we started.
Yeah, and I don't think we're at all trying to get at exchanges must do this, or they should be forced in any manner. But I think it's perfectly allowed for us in this community, going back and forth to say, this is what exchanges should do, in a very similar way to how we think about free speech on social media platforms. That again, these platforms are private entities, but they've come to be these town squares, these open forums, and that ultimately we believe they should allow all free speech, so long as it's abiding by terms and conditions that are rational.
We have to hold them to a decidedly higher standard, because they do have a disproportionate, or can have a disproportionate impact on the broader ecosystem.
Exactly. As the community, we can shout back at them and say, this is what you should do, and with great power comes great responsibility. And yeah, similar to, again, the social media platforms, like you are platforms for price discovery, liquidity, and market making, and ultimately, there is the private decision factors going on of what coins to list. But to a certain extent, once you decide to list a coin, or once there's sort of the elephant in the room of, there's tons of community discussion about you should list a coin. Once it's on the exchange, again, it's sort of it's really hard to then make the argument to walk it back and say, oh, well, now we have to delist it, unless there was some very significant thing going on. But whatever the opinion you have about an individual in a given cryptocurrency, just delisting it because someone ran their mouth or is getting up to antics, however bad in terms of their individual interactions with other members of the industry, to punish an entire coin seems a stretch too far,
and it sends a really interesting precedent. So they're beginning down this road, and then I've already seen on social media people tweeting at X or Y Z other project and their supposed problems and issues, and they'll immediately compare it to that recent delisting and go, well, this is far worse than that, and so on. And it's really interesting. I think an answer, maybe not as instantly compelling and impactful right away to exchange dominance, is the advent of decentralized exchanges. And here is a whole other ball of wax, where you can create notable exceptions and regulations and so on, but you can create alternatives to the dominant exchanges, right?
Exactly. And so almost decentralized exchanges are sort of the answer to this problem of centralized exchanges becoming too powerful, and that there needs to be some, again, private sector regulation of them through competition with this. And by having these DEX, what they're colloquially called, come about, you can create the marketplace without the market maker. And so long as the technology is sound, that should work out. But there has been examples where that still is tricky to figure out. I believe there was a DEX going on with the Ethereum crowd where the creator of it was somehow still able to manage it, and there was some court order going on, and
Right.
I forget the specific details of that story, but
Well, there's also
still a lot
BISC.
to be figured out there.
Yeah. There's also BISC, BISQ, Manfred Karr's project, and that was supposed to be an answer. And then dude just has a major issue with Bitcoin Cash and decides to propose delisting that. And right around sort of the same time period, it just didn't get a whole lot of press. So maybe the decentralized exchange idea comes down to, how decentralized is it really, and can we move from our biases? Like, will it ever really get to a point where someone will go, okay, that looks decentralized to me? But anyway, the ecosystem is ginormous, and I don't see it slowing down. Do you have any kind of sense as to what you might see as sort of popping next in terms of the ecosystem, like an exchange, not an exchange, but something on the level of exchanges, or sort of another industry that you may see coming into play here?
Yeah, so we've laid out that there's developers that work on the protocol and application layers. There's the users, there's the miners, there's the stakers, there's the exchanges, and soon to be more decentralized exchanges. And where the next players could emerge, there's still a lot of different ways that could play out. But I think one to focus on particularly is kind of a group that has kind of been forgotten or neglected. And I think those are, the crypto payment processors, the guys that are really getting into the business of how do we make, point of sale, how do we make online transactions as easy as possible for people to plug into their website, for US dollars to be presented on the front end, and then do a bunch of swaps in the back end. BitPay has they've been doing this for a while, and they're an example of a company that is really focused in this area. And I feel they've been neglected, and I feel this group sort of doesn't get the light it deserves, because we've moved away in the wider space from that use case. We've really forgotten about it, and it's interesting that those groups, those people, didn't seem to have the sway to push things in their direction in terms of making Bitcoin Core fast, easy, cheap, reliable to use, and it went the other direction into this hard to use, expensive settlement layer that doesn't really make sense to build a business around point of sale and online transactions. And so with the advent of Bitcoin Cash and other cryptocurrencies that are prioritizing that use case, hopefully they reemerge as more of a influential player in the industry ecosystem, and that they really vocalize where it should be headed, and onboarding the next wave of adopters, because again, buying and selling is one of the best ways to bring people on to see the utility of these networks. And just having exchanges be these elephants in the room, and kind of abstracting away into, well, it's all about the price going up or down, and we're myopically focusing on these upswings and downswings, and dips and pumps and all this stuff. And I think that's sort of the wrong way to look at it, where you get out of the abstract and you go back to the first principles, and that's where all these these commerce companies, these online retailers, that's who is most clued into the core utility here, and hopefully they reemerge.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as you were talking, I was thinking, well, gee whiz, the exchanges themselves have discovered that as probably the next big play and are moving into that space. I know CoinSpice and some others are working in Europe to help with some of the top-up cards there. BitPay, as you mentioned, but also Gemini is touting the Flexa spending idea of Walmart and Whole Foods, and which has nothing to do with either Walgreens or Walmart, Whole Foods and 30,000 other retailers and whatever else. So it is interesting that they've noticed it as well, that trading back and forth, price discovery, always looking for the shiny new thing is certainly an aspect of the ecosystem, but to give it legs, to give it sustainability, people have to interact with it, man. People have to see it, and they have to be able to touch it and give it a spin. So yeah, I think that's a really, really, really good point that you're making there.
Yeah, I appreciate the efforts that Gemini's making in that manner when they're bringing on Flexa and they're getting Whole Foods and the rest to kind of engage in this cryptocurrency. But I think there's something to be observed there that's a little pernicious, which is it seems to be they're really marketing in terms of, use our Gemini Flexa collaboration tech to send Gemini stable coins, around, and then that can be converted back and forth to fiat and pay the retailers just fine. And I think if we start going down that path where it's like, oh, wow, let's convert our fiat to a cryptocurrency that is pegged to that same fiat so that we can then send it to a retailer that converts it back to fiat. I think that's sort of not the exact path that we should be going down.
Yeah.
Although I believe that they are including ways that you can use the other cryptocurrencies that they have listed on their platform, to send and do that sort of double conversion thing. But yeah, I think that's a risk that we can get into, kind of trying to get the name crypto out there, and then all of a sudden it's sort of, well, we really just invented some new fintech thing with these stable coins, and it has nothing to do with what crypto is, which is a separate monetary system, which is a new money, which is a better system than the fiat traditional options that are presented to us as default. So I think that's the thing to watch when it comes to folks like that getting into the business of commerce and retail.
It is interesting that the wildness, the wildcat, open, free sort of zeitgeist or whatever that bred and birthed Bitcoin, and then this 10-year-in ecosystem has now become something that the big boys, the major financial institutions that want to come in and tame. It is really, really interesting, and they just seem to be building these bigger outside boxes that are trying to contain something that like water just simply cannot be stopped, and they're trying to put a new face on it and make it friendly and easy, and this the whole power is maybe disruption, and I don't know. We'll see how that shakes out. The Coinbases of the world, I think, should get a lot of credit for onboarding people who found maybe wallets and other things icky, and they went out and created a UX that people can get behind and find familiar. How much it takes away and how what it really translates into, I'm like you. I'm somewhat skeptical about 50 million steps to get to where we already are. But the payment processors who are doing the yeoman's work, creating easier stripped down wallets and better point of sale systems. I think you're absolutely right. They're the ones to watch going forward.
Yeah, and we've talked about some big folks that are in the industry in terms of those payment processor like services, but also like there's little guys out there, and I always enjoy looking at what a company called Bitbacker is doing, and they saw this need to have a crypto Patreon like service out there, and they went out and created it. And it's a little rough around the edges, but it's out there, and it's something that was immediately I think grabbed some sort of virality or optimism in the industry, because people could clearly see this is a great use. This is an ideal use. People that need subscriptions and patrons and want to get paid for their content on a regular basis. Let's find a way to bring cryptocurrencies into that and solve that niche.
All right, man. Well, appreciate you coming on and another great Peter Ryan report. Where can people find your work?
Yeah, people can follow me at Twitter @_Peter Ryan. That's where you can find some great stuff. I tweet quite a bit, charts, data, reporting of the industry, some really cool memes, stuff like that. Also, recently launched, you can follow me at ryanresearch.co. It's my new research firm, and we'll be reporting on mainly cryptocurrency as well as other cutting edge technologies. You can find articles, videos, podcasts that I've been on, and you can soon find in-depth and data-driven reports on there that cover the gamut when it comes to what's going on in this industry. And always, please subscribe to my newsletter when you get there.
You're listening to the Peter Ryan Report on CoinSpice.io. You're listening to the Peter Ryan Report on CoinSpice.io.
You're listening to the Peter Ryan Report on CoinSpice.io.